Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. 15-year-old Max Dowman has been the talk of Arsenal's pre-season, and 16-year-old Rio Ngumoha has shone for Liverpool as well. So it can either break into the first team, and when is it too soon to get excited? With us, we've got Stu James and Jacob Tanswell. Stu, Max Dowman, 15 years old. You saw him back in January. You've written about him. Is he a special player?
He's an incredible player. I mean, I think the first thing to say when writing about someone of that age is you feel this extra layer of responsibility because they are a child. And I was very mindful of that before I went to see him. I spoke to Charlie, my editor, and I said, we both agreed we didn't want to write a piece on him having watched him on show reels. We didn't feel that was the right way to do things. And actually, there were very few chances to go and see Max Dowman play last season. He was too young to play for Arsenal's first team, even though he may well have been good enough to do that. He actually played an under-21 game when he shouldn't have done. So those fixtures then stopped because he was too young to play in that. But the FA Youth Cup gave us a chance to go along. So I went to QPR that night. I'd watched a lot of footage of him on YouTube before. And yeah, it was just fascinating to see him play. He's playing 3 years up at that point, which is a huge deal. He was the best player on the pitch by an absolute distance. There was a buzz every time he got the ball. The way he dribbles is just sensational. The ball's glued to his foot, but he's really, really fast dribbling too. Just explodes away from players. And there was another, good reason to go along and watch him live, because obviously the show reels only see the bits that people want you to see. When you go along to a game, you see his position when he hasn't got the ball. You see how he reacts when things go wrong, or there are difficult moments in a game. And there was a fascinating moment early in the second half where he received the ball close to the touchline. He's playing on the right wing and he dribbles with his left foot a lot. So he shows players the ball, and he does that in a way to almost tease them, like he did with Joe Linton the other day when he then steps inside him. Anyway, on this occasion, a lad came a lot cross and absolutely cleaned him out, but fairly too. An old school tackle, took the ball and took Dowman as well. And the left back for QPR was revelling in that moment. And I don't criticise him for that at all. Most people would. They all knew, the QPR players, that Dowman was the best player on the pitch. And there were kind of loud cheers and encouragement for the midfielder who kind of cleaned Dowman out. So Dowman was on the floor. He got up, literally brushed himself down. It was like a wet night kind of thing. He's covered in mud. And I thought, how's he going to react to this now? And he didn't, say anything to any of the players, but he just kind of waved the finger at the left back like that. About 15 minutes later, gets the ball, scores a lovely goal, and that's the best possible response to it. So that kind of told me a little bit about his character and his mentality too, because you think, well, how will he deal with being roughed up a little bit? Really, really well. But the overriding impression was of a lad who's incredibly comfortable with the ball, who glides past players and is an incredible talent.
We're going to go into this a little later on, but, in terms of his age as well, because I find it really fascinating that he's still a kid at school, technically, if you think about it. But Jacob, as well as covering Aston Villa, and I know they won the FA Youth Cup last season. I know you were in the youth ranks at Bournemouth as well at the academy. Look, Stu's talking about Max Dowman there. I'm sure you're thinking, that's a young me. I swear I had that in my locker as well back in the day. But really, when you see a player like him, and also we talk about Rio Ngumoha, how good are they for their age?
Massively. You go, like Stu references, you go through social media clips, you see show reels of them, you see them doing tricks. But when you see them 90 minutes, the key for a manager, even in the age group above, is to trust them, to trust they're going to do the job, because they're not operating at levels where they're under 16s, under 18s. They're operating at the high end where, the financial repercussions, jobs are on the line. To be able to be that young but that mature for the manager to earn their trust is probably the biggest thing. When I was at Bournemouth, though, I was a centre-back, which was kind of just labouring every age group. And I didn't even think about playing in the year above. If anyone had played in the year above, you were like, wow, word would spread. You think, no, unbelievable player. You wouldn't, I got up to under 16 level, but the first team was so far away. Like, they were training in different places. You barely saw them. And if any of our players went to the youth team, you'd be like, wow, how was it? What was the manager like? Are they scary? Are they bigger than us? They're playing with, Max Dowman was playing with players that are 10, 15 years older than him, and he's been trusted to do the job that Arteta wants. It's quite exceptional. That's a short answer.
Even at that age, though, when you were playing at Bournemouth, were there some kids that you thought, they're looking a bit higher now, because I feel like, ambition and all those kind of things are all relative to age, right? Like there will be some kids even at that young age whose parents are like, you know what, you need to aim for the first team at some point, lad. And they're almost rearing them for that moment.
Yeah, it's a bit like society. Everyone wants things quicker, don't they, nowadays? And you see it with the agents are coming in, trying to get players younger. Everyone wants to push for that first team. I mean, young as possible, really. And you see examples now of players that are 17, 18 and being impatient that they're not on a first team and try to move away. And there's always players at every academy where they may have a parent or they may have that belief in themselves where they think, I'm not happy where I am. I should be pushing for the first team. But often these players that are 16, 17, the reason why they're pushing is because they physically develop more than everyone else. They're bigger than everyone. That's why biobanning and that type of thing is coming into the sport, because it favours people that are physically more mature. They advance quicker. But then you look at Max Dowman, and he's not getting to the level he's getting to. He's not playing with the first team because he's bigger than other 15-year-olds. He's getting there because of his technical ability, which I think is probably the biggest credit to him, really. He's not just shrugging players off the ball, beating people in a sprint at his age. He's doing it because technically he's so precocious, and mentally as well. He sees things that players at his age don't.
I think that is really, really fascinating point what Jacob makes there, because before, long before I went to watch him, when I first heard Dowman's name and there was this guy playing way above his age, the thing that came in my mind immediately was exactly what Jacob said. He must be a really early developer. He must be so much more powerful than the other boys. Now, he is a fantastic athlete, clearly, but when you watch Dowman for the first time, you go and see him, you don't think, oh, wow, look at the size of him. That is not what has got him to where he is now. It is this incredible, as Jacob says, technical ability, his talent to really go and express himself. He's got this explosive pace, of course, but often, as Jacob says, what will happen in academies is the boys who will play up will be the biggest, strongest players in that age group. And if you look at academies, traditionally, there are an incredible amount of boys born between September and December, what they call Q1, right, Jacob? The first quarter. It's almost unfair. It's disproportionate. That it's really, if you've got a birth around that time, you have got, on the face of it, a better opportunity to be in an academy. And equally, if you're like a June, July, August, then you're going to have really exceptional talent for someone to kind of think, yeah, we'll persevere with this. And like you mentioned there about biobanding, they might even play players down to give them more time to develop. That's something I know we're going to talk about Benfica a bit later on. That's what they've done with players over time. But with Dowman, yeah, it's just astonishing to see the way he's gone through those age groups, but he's done it right from the start. He joined Arsenal at the age of 4. He was playing up almost immediately then. So this has kind of been a natural progression for him to get to where he is. An amazing talent.
We'll talk about how, we manage those expectations a little later on. But Jacob, let's talk about Fearn. He handed a Premier League debut at 15 at Arsenal. Jeremy Monga at Leicester, made 7 appearances as a 15-year-old in the Premier League last season as well. I don't know if you have the insight, because I've just been noticing this, but why do you think so many of these young kids are getting a chance, at least, at such an early age right now?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One I touched on, words seems to spread quicker now in this digital age. You see these social media accounts where they're finding clips of 14, 15-year-olds doing some unbelievable dribbles, and they're online and they're posted everywhere. But also recruitment is becoming more aggressive since Brexit as well. A lot of clubs are now trying to scout internally within the UK. So there's more competition for players, and clubs know that if they have a real promise and a real gem on their hands, there's going to be a lot of other clubs that are circling, and they'll offer the land, basically, more money. When they get to 17, a professional contract on this amount of money, they'll say you can come into our first team. So although it's not all because of this, there's a feeling that you need to show them there's a pathway straight away, otherwise they'll leave, because someone else, another agent, another club are promising that there is. And there's been a few times at the clubs I've covered at Bournemouth, Southampton and Aston Villa where there's been some real properly good talents, but they haven't come on in one game, and that's put their nose out of joint, even if they're 17, 18, and their agents nose out of joint, and they think, okay, we'll go somewhere else, and at the end of that season they do go somewhere else. So it's a combination of clubs wanting to show there is a pathway, and we do trust you, we do really like you, but also just how good they are, that managers go, yeah, I fully trust them to come on in a game. and be good.
I just think about what I was doing at 15. I was trying to serve at the local cafe, do you know what I mean, in Birmingham. And here's a kid, Stu, and, we could go on, even Ethan Nanweri or Jeremy Monga. I was rubbing shoulders with genuine superstars, maybe even traveling with them, as we're seeing in pre-season, to countries far afield, man. It's insane.
It is incredible. And there was a nice message that went out on social media from Max Dowman's school in the wake of him making his senior debut on this tour. And it said, words, it's a really simply worded message, but it said something like, congratulations to our year 10 pupil, Max D, it said. It didn't even say Max Dowman, Max D on playing for Arsenal's first team. It's the sort of thing that someone, might say, just want to say congratulations to our year 10 pupil Luke, who made his first half century for his local cricket club on the weekend, kind of thing. And yet this is a guy who's playing for Arsenal's first team. It is insane. And I thought that when I was going to write about him, because I was thinking, hang on, you're a year 10 pupil. You're still 18 months away from doing your GCSEs. You're, 3 years away from being able to drive a car yet. It's crazy. And presumably, he goes into Arsenal. For some time, he's been going into London Colney, to train with Arsenal's first team or under 21s 2 days a week. And then on the other days, I don't know, he must be in the playground kicking about with his mates, picking teams. Can
you imagine?
That is bonkers, right? It's all of that, living his life on fast forward must be so surreal for his family too. The whole thing is bonkers.
Well, timing when it comes to offering opportunity is something that is always hotly debated when an exciting young talent emerges. Over on our Arsenal podcast, Handbrake Off, Amy Lawrence is in no doubt as to whether Dowman is ready.
It's really hard not to get terribly excited because he is exceptional in every way, it seems, for what, like I said, even if he was 17 or 18 and looking like he looks and playing like he plays, you'd be tremendously excited. If he cost 60 million quid from somewhere else, you'd be purring. He's a 15-year-old lad that's, born not too far from, the Arsenal training ground, Hertfordshire areas, and come through an Arsenal family. It's mind-boggling to think how good he already is, never mind how good he's going to be. I think I just find myself trying to work out how to best handle it, because while you do want to be careful, I also think you have to be fair to talent. You have to respect talent.
Yeah, I love that. Respect talent, because that is what we're in this game for, gents. We love to see talent emerge and we love to get excited by that talent. What do you think about that phrase, respect the talent, Stu?
Spot on. It's that old adage, isn't it? If you're good enough, you're old enough. He has the talent. There's no doubt about that at all to me. Absolutely. He is comfortable playing at first team level for Arsenal, I believe. You see those clips, pre-season games against Newcastle. That's just in a little cameo where he's lighting the game up. He's influencing the game. I think a big thing for young players, sometimes when they go in and train with the first team or play with the first team, they're very inhibited. They play safe. They are consumed by fear. Jacob and I may well have had those kind of experiences. I certainly did at Swindon when I went into the reserves, which at the time then was playing against men. It wasn't an under 21, under 23 league. You were playing against the first team players who didn't play in the Premier League on a Saturday for their clubs. And all I would be thinking was play safe, play safe. Don't get a rollicking off one of the other players for making a mistake. These guys obviously have the talent, but they also have the mentality too to go in there and really express themselves. So I think they often talk about 4 pillars. So there's the technical side. He ticks that box clearly. Tactical, I think he's got a great understanding of the game. We don't even know what position he's going to end up in yet, Dowman. He could play on the wing. Lots of people think he'll end up as a 10. There's even talk of him being a kind of hybrid 8-10. Then you look at the physicality. And it's really interesting, reading James's piece, reflecting on the tour and obviously the conversations they had with people there, and how Arteta really gave a lot of thought to whether he played Dowman in that Newcastle game at all, because he knew it would be a really physical test. And he's thinking, even talking about bone density and things like that, can he cope with the heavy challenges that might come in? I think I'm right in saying he was the most fouled player in that game, even though he was only on for half an hour. And obviously one of those fouls led to a penalty. The other really interesting thing that James flagged was it said that when Arsenal look at their data, Dowman's physical output in training is completely comparable to any first team player. So he is ready on that level. And then I think the final element here is fascinating for me, because there's been loads of players over the years who've had amazing talent, but they haven't necessarily had the mentality to go with it. And Dowman clearly has that. He will go in and absolutely express himself and not have any sense of fear whatsoever. Now, the interesting side, what we don't know yet, there's this huge hype around him, which I'm sure Arsenal didn't want, but it's impossible to dampen that in any way. You look at the back pages of the papers after the first game on tour and it's full of Dowman headlines. How will he handle that? Everything suggests really well, given what we know about his mentality, the strong family support around him. But the other side of it, what happens when things go a little bit wrong? What if he makes a few mistakes? What if his performances just dip a bit if he goes into the first team? And the side of it that I really don't like now, and it concerns me with all young players, is social media. That wasn't there when I was playing, but I think that's a brutal world. Even if the player doesn't engage with that himself, family members often do. They get affected by it. So there are a lot of things to consider, but on the face of it, he's in a really, really good place. And I'd be amazed if we don't see him feature next season a reasonable amount, and I think he's nailed on to become the Premier League's youngest ever goal scorer.
Lamine Yamal. He was 15 years old, 9 months and 16 days when he made his debut. Before reaching adulthood, he had won, listen to this, La Liga and the Euros. He's won the Copa Trophy and European Golden Boy, and named in the team of the tournament for the Euros and Champions League. Stu, Arsene Wenger recently said, no one this age has ever played over 100 games by, I think, the age of 17 or whatever. This is quite exceptional. Let's also not say this isn't normal at all, is it?
It's not normal at all. No, absolutely. And I think the stat is, 17 years, 292 days when he played that 100th game for Barcelona. Messi was 20 when he got to that point. Ronaldo was about to turn 20. Mbappe was 19. That really we're talking about three unbelievable players there, three of the greatest in this generation. And there's Yamal playing that number of games, but not just playing that number of games, again, having a really big influence on those games. The amount of, I think he scored 33 goals in those matches. His goals and assists, the numbers that really matter, the attacking output are incredible. So, yeah, it is freakish, really, what he's done. I guess if there was a concern, it would be, what does that look like in terms of burnout? Should he be playing that number of games in such a short space of time so quickly? Everything at the minute suggests he can cope with that perfectly fine. But if you look at his last two seasons, and bear in mind last season, obviously he won the Euros with Spain, it's the international games on top. He has a short break, then he goes straight back with Barcelona. This season, because they didn't play in the Club World Cup, he's had a slightly longer break. But in terms of what he's doing, that is just... It's just amazing, really. Nothing compares with that.
Yeah, Jacob, we look at Yamal, we look at Ngumoha, we look at Dowman. Obviously, Yamal's way ahead of those, the latter two. But how impressive is it, though, that these three players I've just mentioned are breaking through into teams that are genuinely at the top of their game? Barcelona, what a season, right? The growth of the Hansi Flick, incredible. Arsenal, we see the growth. Liverpool, Premier League winners. That is quite exceptional, isn't it?
It is, and often you see a lot of young players when in cup competitions, in the Carabao Cup, in the early rounds, or towards the end of the season when it's not much to play for, and maybe the club want a bit of PR or they want a bit of positivity into the next season, thinking these might be the guys that break through next year or the year after. But they're in an environment, like you say, that are full of, they've got beasts in that squad that are pushing to win, and constantly it's unforgiving, really. You're not in a playing Wycombe Wanderers away in the second round of a cup. No disrespect to Wycombe Wanderers, but it's like,
I hear you.
And for squad rotation, you're coming in playing in Champions League, like Stu mentioned. You're even playing physically against big giants, against Newcastle, even in pre-season. You're coming into, and you're considered a first-team player. You're considered to come in and do your job as well as a Martin Odegaard would do, for example. So what these guys are doing that you mentioned, Ayo, is wonderful. And the climate they're doing it in is so challenging, and that needs to be appreciated.
Yeah, you don't have to look any further than La Masia as to how they work with youth talent and promote them. Gavi, Pedri, the list goes on. All right, when it comes to youth development, Stu, Benfica's interesting, and I know you've been reporting on what they do. How do they work with their youth team? How do they work with young players coming up? Because you think about Bernardo Silva, Ruben Dias, Joao Felix, all come through that academy.
Yeah, they've got an amazing track record there of producing players. But there's also an inherent need to produce players there. I think sometimes you feel that top clubs have academies almost for the sake of having academies? Is there really joined up thinking between the first team and the academy? Is it at times more of a business model than actually a way of bringing players through to the first team? At Benfica, there is, the best way I can put this is when I was speaking to Pedro Marques, the technical director at Benfica, who's now at Liverpool, and he started talking about the young players who've come through, he looked down at his arms and he said, look, I've got goosebumps. He said, that's how much it means to us here. He said, and there was another game going on when I was there. It was being played away from home, but they had it on the television screens all around the academy. Forgive me, I can't remember what age group that game was, but a goal was scored in that game and for Benfica, and everyone was cheering in the corridors. It means that much to the people there. So, yeah, it's fascinating to spend that time there. And at that point, João Neves was just trying to break through, and we look and see what he's gone on to do now. I think if there's any frustration for the academy staff, although they completely understand this, is that they would just love to keep hold of those players a tiny bit longer. They said their dream was for the team for them to have, because I said, it's great, you've got 4 players in the first team from the academy. And they said to me, it's not enough. And I kind of smiled and they went, I'm serious, it's not enough. And I said, well, what do you want? And they said 6 or 7 and to win the Champions League with those players. So that's how high the bar is set for them. But it's also a really competitive environment in there. I mean, they had 500 players in their academy system. That's an incredible lot. And obviously, the vast majority of those, as is the case everywhere else, are not going to end up as professional footballers. So, but a brilliant environment, really fascinating to watch them at work. But that was the big take home I came away with, that this means so much to that academy to get players through to the first team. And I think if you're working as an academy coach, and I've spoken to plenty of people over the years who are in this situation, it can be incredibly frustrating if you don't have that joined up thinking and that connection and that feeling that actually what we're working towards here is to get a player in the first team, and that's also what the first team want.
I'm just thinking how you prepare players, Jacob, for what might be to come. Those expectations, you've made the academy, maybe one day I might make the first team. I mean, how do you keep these players grounded genuinely? Is it down to the coaching? Is it down to the club? Is it down to parenting? Is it down to the staff? I mean, how does it all work?
I think it's important for clubs to realise who are the coaches, who are the influencers in their life. So how do they want to be spoken to? Are they a player that needs to be grounded, that needs regular conversations? Are they a guy that needs to be pushed a little bit in terms of, let's push up an age group, or let's be challenged, let's be a bit harder on him because he can take it and we can really drive progression that way. I think conversations with clarity with parents, making sure that, of course, when they're this level and this elite level, the feet are on the ground, they're not distracted by potential the temptations almost of agents, money, first team opportunities elsewhere. There's conversations, regular check-ins, and making sure they're okay. I know there's I've spoken to a few academy coaches at clubs who have seen their player go and make first team appearances, and sometimes, depending on their personality type, again, they will say, right, the next couple of sessions they're back with us, we're going to be really, really quite on them to show that they still have to perform here. They're not resting on their laurels. And on the flip side, there's other times where you be a little bit softer, and then you think, okay, they've had that chance in the first team, they're now here, they might be a little bit disappointed, they're back here again. Let's just be softer and let's have a nicer conversation. So it's important that those guys who have been working in the academy for 5 to 10 years, who have seen these kids from young as 4 in Dowman's case to all the way up to their teenage years, are still there. So when that time comes and they've jumped to the first team, they're still there as a point of reference and a point of contact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about this in terms of duty of care, Stu, and please, Jacob, jump in if you can. But, I was reading a piece on the BBC by a guy called Chris Bevan, incredible piece about how hard it is for, youth players to make it into a Premier League squad, for instance. And I think it's like a percentage of 0.012%. Like, out of 1.5 million players, 180 of them will end up making it potentially to play in the Premier League. I mean, how do you get your young people ready for that? I know you coach youth players, Stu. How do you manage that with them? Because obviously for the industry, it's great to have so many players who want to be Premier League players, but not many of them are going to make it.
No, I remember someone saying to me many years ago, when I was writing a piece before World Cup, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, but they said to me, if we were a university of football, we would be shut down because the success rates are so low. But Again, it's interesting, when you speak to academy coaches and they'll say, like, they always do the talk at the start of the year with all the new influx of parents and say, look, these are the statistics, these are the numbers that make it. And everyone goes, the parents are all nodding their head. But you know what, Ayo? They're all thinking, that won't be my son. My son will be the one that comes through, And in a way, right, you have to have that belief. You have to think you're going to be the one, or there's no point in going into it. But I think generally, like, over time, then there are the telltale signs. Most people will have a good realization as to whether they're going to make it or not. There are regular meetings that I'm sure Jacob would have been part of with his family at that time. So they're trying to manage expectations. So if you get to, the end of the year and they're going to say, we're going to let you go, it shouldn't come as a shock. You should have a good grasp on the guys in your age group who are excelling, who are playing year up. If they're an under 16, they're going into the youth team and they're being stretched in that way. But all these cases are different. It was interesting hearing about Lewis Skelly recently in Nwaneri, and Arsenal felt that Nwaneri was emotionally, in the early years, better able to handle playing a few years up than Lewis Skelly was. So obviously that changes over time, and Lewis Skelly did end up playing up a few age groups. But talking, going back to Jacob's point, what he said, the coaches will have a good grasp of that. They're with the boys on a regular basis. They're connected to the families. So it isn't just talent. It's, have they got the mentality to cope with all of that? But yeah, to come back to a point at the start, I think you can't go into it. If you're going to join the academy, if you're hell-bent on being a professional footballer, you have got to try and close out those odds. And most people will say, won't they, when they're asked, what was your plan B? Well, it was plan A. I didn't really think of anything else. And I know that's not what some people want to hear. They'll think you should be thinking of a second career. But what if it doesn't work out? Most people have only got one chance of it working out. So you've got to be all in.
Was your plan B being a journalist, Jacob?
Well, this is the thing. I was a bit of a realist. I kind of knew in the last year I was there that I could just see the signs. I didn't have that inner belief like Stu mentioned. I didn't think I was going to be the footballer. I could see there were other players better than me. I could see their coaches were talking to them differently.
That's fair.
But looking back on it, that slight bit of doubt was actually caused me to completely collapse in the end, really, because I was thinking, okay, right, I'm probably not going to get a scholarship. This means that I need to start looking at college options, or I start need to looking at a different role. I was reading newspapers on the way to away games. I was thinking, okay, could I potentially be a journalist at this point? But at that point, that completely meant my football fell away in the end. So if you want to make it, you have to have that desire. And you think, clubs will have talkers come into the academy and they'll say to them, this is a potential career. No one really listens. I was the only one listening. I was looking around. Everyone else was on their phone, looking at the wall. They were thinking, no, this won't be me. This is going to be me. I'm going to be in the first team one day. So when that time does come and they do get given the talk, it's a shock. It was a shock for me, even though I kind of knew in the back of my mind, when they were actually saying those words, it was a shock. So, no, what's it like for someone that thinks and they're adamant that they're going to make it and they are told they're not? That is a big thing. And everyone knows the statistics. You know that beforehand, like Stu says. Players as young as 11, 12 know the 0.01% or whatever it is. They know that statistic, but yet they always think, it won't be me. I'm going to be the guy that makes it. So when they get told, it's brutal, really. And this aftershock really can last for a few years.
So Liverpool's Rio Ngumoha has already scored twice in pre-season for Arne Slot's side. After his latest goal in Yokohama last week, Slot had this to say about his performance.
Rio again showed the quality he has, and that's nice for us because we have a lot of very, very good players, but to get some very good players for the academy is always helpful. Always gives energy to a team as well. It's always nice to see young players from 16, 17 or 18 years old already impacting a game. But there was also a moment in the game where he should have squared it to Maka or Curtis. So also learning points for him. But if you're 16 and you can impact the game like he did, that's definitely worth a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, Arne Slot there, giving praise to Ngumoha, but also, I mean, say criticism, but I think quite a balanced view, Jacob. And I think that's fair because, you still got a player who's still developing, really. But how important is that timing and when you insert them into the team? Because he's a wide player. Luis Diaz has just gone to Bayern Munich. It's a nice opportunity to see what you can do for this first team.
Yeah, that was really interesting from Slot, and that's probably indicative of what most managers try to do. They try to be balanced. They try to act with common sense. But at the same time, these are young lads that are still maturing physically, but crucially mentally as well. So they don't want to be beaten down. They don't, the way and the tone of language you use probably for a 16, 17-year-old is far different to what you use for a Virgil van Dijk, for instance. So it's about being balanced, but recognizing as well that these are special talents, and maybe in that case, as a winger, you can kind of manage their minutes, you can kind of integrate them a little bit more, give them cameos maybe at the start of the season, more so than if you were a young centre back, for example, or a centre midfielder who's playing in a position which typically is associated with more leadership. So what Slot said there is really interesting in terms of the balance he strikes, and that what he said to the press is probably what he's echoing in private as well.
I think that's a really interesting point here, that there's a huge responsibility on the shoulders of the coaches here, in terms of how they handle these players. I mean, right down to simple things that obviously weren't there years ago and are rightly there now, but these players are getting changed in a different dressing room, right, on their own. So, that kind of highlights how extraordinary this situation is, really. And yet then they will go in for a team talk with the other players, and Jacob's right, the manager will tailor his language and the tone of what he says, you'd hope, differently to a 16-year-old to what he'd say to, say, Andy Robertson in his early 30s if he'd made a mistake. But actually that young player is still listening to the manager talking to the 33-year-old in a way that would probably be quite strange for most 16-year-olds to be in a workplace hearing someone maybe get a right rollicking kind of thing. So you're growing up really, really fast in that environment. I remember thinking that, when I'd left school at 16 and suddenly I was playing in a reserve team dressing room where there were players who were like really frustrated, who didn't think they should be there, essentially playing with someone like me in the reserves. And they're not going to, treat you with kid gloves. Their future's on the line. They've got a mortgage, they've got kids at home. They want to be in the first team. And all of that is a really strange mix that the manager has to handle actually in a very, very careful way. And I guess the other thing with this is, I think like Rashford at United, I'm not saying he wouldn't have come through, but if you remember at that time, there was like a striker crisis. There's like a sliding doors moment with some of these players. And then they have to then take that opportunity. So someone might say, oh, you're a bit lucky to get that chance. But then Rashford wasn't lucky to score the goals he did when he came into the team. So all of that is really interesting. Managers are under pressure to get results. To put a young player in is a risk. Often it will be, like Jacob said earlier, in a game against, we're going to have Wycombe Wanderers fans complaining after this, in the Carabao Cup or something. But to do it at first team level in a Premier League game, that's something else, I think. So, yeah, they've got a duty of care and a duty of responsibility as well.
You know what's interesting? We keep talking about the current transfer window, but I'm also thinking about transfer for youth players in terms of, the commodity they can be. You look at Ngumoha, who's gone from Chelsea to Liverpool. You look at transfers from Arsenal to Manchester United, for instance. A lot of these young players are sometimes looking at the team they've grown up in and gone, actually, I can't see myself making it to first team here, so I'm going to jump ship. So, in terms of scouting, Stu, and also Jacob, jump in here. I mean, that is also as important as you're looking for first team players from abroad or wherever.
Jacob mentioned earlier, didn't he, about the ramifications of Brexit potentially, which has probably led to more domestic transfers now. It's a really good point. And I think, you get to this really critical age where we've seen, you mentioned there, the players who've gone from Arsenal to United in recent times. And obviously we're just talking about Rio now going from Chelsea to Liverpool. There are a lot of transfers around. It's a really critical time. Arsenal won't need any telling. There'll be anyone and everyone would love to take Dowman at this opportunity. They're going to come up. There's going to come a point, obviously, when they can put a contract in front of him, and that contract's going to be really, really important. Everything we're led to believe, money won't be the be all and end all. He's an Arsenal fan. He's been at Arsenal for years. I think a really important factor is, can you show them a pathway? And at Arsenal now, they don't need to just talk about that pathway. They can say, hey, Look at the guys who are playing in the first team at the minute. Look what's happened with Lewis Skelly. Look what's happened with Ranieri. So I think that's a really powerful thing. I remember years ago speaking to someone at Southampton about that, who've, I feel, Jacob, you'll know better than me, kind of fallen away a little bit, probably quite away with where they were at one time, with regularly producing top players through their academy. And I always felt the most powerful thing they could do was say, look at the wall. Look at that list of players. And that's what Benfica have. They have a wall in the corridor of all the players who've come through. So you're not just giving someone the spiel. You're actually saying, no, there's the evidence. If you come here, there's a chance to break through at first team level. The other thing I'll say though on this finally, I think money plays a part in all of this too, and we'd be naive to think it doesn't.
Let's not forget.
Some of these players are talking up a pathway, and I'm not seeing any better pathway at the club they're going to at the one they're leaving. And I guess, we could sit in judgment on that. Everyone's circumstances are different. If someone is being offered life-changing money at a young age, yeah, we could all say, you shouldn't be chasing the money. There are not many people who wouldn't probably take that. So
That's absolutely right. In terms of the money side of things as well, agencies is becoming more competitive. There's more of them. The bigger companies are hoovering up a lot of talent, and you see it now. A lot of agents are actually switching from working with senior players. They retire or move on, and actually just focusing specifically between 16 to 20-year-olds, because they think actually that's a USP that I can get into. That's maybe what I can really specialize in. And then you have these two choices. Do you, like Stu says, focus on pathway for your client? Do you back them? You think they're so good that the money's just going to come anyway. We can just make sure they just stay in the team, and then later down the line they'll get their rewards. Or do you think probably in all likelihood they're not going to make it, so let's just get this might be his only big contract, so let's just push this, let's not really focus on pathways. It might not be one, but nice 3-year contracts on a couple of 10-15 grand a week, that might set them up for a good long while. You see these players, they're not just plucked out of school and they're living in their family home. A lot of these kids, that even when they're 18, 19 and they're playing 3 or 4 appearances a season, they're driving big cars, they've got fancy watches, they're going on big nice holidays because of the money that there is at youth level and the clubs that are willing to give them the money. And Stu touched on Southampton. One of the reasons why they've lost a lot of talent recently to other clubs is because they're trying to actually restrict their wage structure. They felt it got out of hand. So what they're doing now is they've got a wage cap, a wage limit, and as a result, a lot of agents with young players are now taking their clients elsewhere.
On that, actually, in terms of development or the reasons a player might move to another team, is there a right or wrong way to develop a player? I mean, you can look at Foden and how he's developed at Manchester City. Chelsea model, I mean, have lots of kids and just loan them out to other clubs for them to get experience. I mean, what's the right way of doing this, Jacob?
I think it depends on the player. That's the short answer. In terms of what is their weaknesses in their game, if this is quite a cliche, but if it is physicality, if it is they need to be hardened up, then probably a loan elsewhere would fit the bill. If they feel that that's not a problem, like for example in the case of Max Dowman, but then potentially may not be trusted yet in the first team, then maybe their development is best suited to be around the first team, 6 to 12 months training with their manager, and it's really improving them development, but probably away from the public glare, which may help them. But again, it comes back to having regular conversation with them, their family, their agent, to outline the plan, say, okay, they may not start in senior football yet, but we've got a plan for them. So you just have to be patient. And if they go on board with it, then I think that's a really good sign.
Yeah, I mean, Stu, I'm sure those kind of conversations would have been had with a player like Reece Nelson, for instance, at Arsenal, who so many of us were so excited could take that next step. I think he will live rent-free in my head after what he did against Bournemouth still. But we've seen various loan opportunities for him, and he's never really been able to cut into that Arsenal first team.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult with the loan situation. So some managers, like think of the Foden situation, there was lots of talk, wasn't there, Foden not playing enough football, if you remember, early on. And I think Guardiola had a feeling at the time also that it was more important, his development would benefit more from having him around the first team at City than it would go into another club on loan. I think into what Reece Nelson, the loans that people take are so important. A friend of mine who was working at a top club in the academy said to me that they'd sometimes get calls from, football league clubs saying, have you got any players we could take on loan? And they hated that question. They were like, no, you should be coming to us saying, this is a player in your academy or in your under 19s, 21s who we think fits what we want to do. Not like, can we have anyone there? So there's joined up thinking. And I think, often clubs will think when they're loaning a player out more about the coach who's going to be working with that player than the club they're going to, so that they know that player will then be developed in the right way. But it's difficult. You talk about a case with Reece Nelson. None of this none of this, it's not like a linear process, is it? You know, we've seen plenty of players over the years who've been unbelievable talents at a young age, and then for a variety of reasons, it just hasn't quite taken off. You know, there will be a Wayne Rooney who knew at 16 when he went in trained with United's first team, that Everton's first team. I think he actually said that they were crap. He said my impression was they were crap, and I was the best player there. He thought that straight away, and maybe he was right about the latter bit. I'm not going to comment on the crap bit. He genuinely said that, and he had that, you know, belief in he was never going to go on loan and he was just going to fly like Yamal's doing at Barcelona. But for others, the path is different, and you know, sometimes it takes a little while, and then a few years down the line they will, you know, go on to be what we thought they would. Others, sadly, just kind of drift away. That's the nature of the game.
On that subject, there's a piece live on The Athletic right now with Charlie Patino, the former Arsenal youngster, speaking with Thomas Hill Lopez Menchero. Patino has his say when asked about the dangers in hyping up young talent, with Max Dowman clearly in the spotlight.
15 to be breaking in is obviously a massive thing. It's, you know, it's very rare for people that age to be doing that. You know, I say, from my experience, is just to, you know, not put too much pressure on a kid that age. Just let him, you know, learn from training. You know, put him in when needed, and kind of just give them time to adapt, to, you know, get that experience, to see what it was like. And that's what I was like when I first started training with the first team at, you know, 17, 16, 18. You know, that age was, you know, learn from the likes of Jacques or David Luiz, you know, big egos in the group, you know, big characters. And that's how I kind of learned from them, and yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I mean, Patino, I remember, highly rated. We thought he would be the next Max Dowman as Arsenal fans, Stu. And please jump in, Jacob, as well. But I wonder if there is something here, because he's now playing at Deportivo La Coruña. Obviously, historically, a great team in Spain, actually, but they're now playing in the second division in Spain. It just kind of shows that not every wonder kid will end up at a major club or make it to the first team of the club they've come up in. But then I think about it, a lot of these players don't have a plan B, really. Just playing football, surely, Stu, for a club professionally, is the icing on the cake.
Yeah, it is. And as I said earlier, I think you have to be completely focused on that. You know, there are very few who will be like, well, if this doesn't work out, then I'm going to turn to X. In fact, lots of players, you know, really struggle with that afterwards. Patino interests me. I was well aware of the hype. We'd seen the videos of him playing at, you know, age group level at Arsenal. I watched him for a full season on loan, you know, when he was playing at Swansea, and I was really excited by his signing, and it just didn't work out. I no doubt he's got talent. Now, I remember when I did the piece on Max Dowman, some of the comments were saying, yeah, we heard this kind of stuff about Patino. If I can make one clear difference between the two, and I mean this really, really respectfully from watching them both, Dowman's athleticism is on a completely different level to Patino. Completely different level. In terms of his explosiveness, his pace, his ability to drive away from players. I just don't see that in Patino. And I think in the modern game, as we're talking about it now, you know, a lot of the players will have really, really strong physical attributes. You know, people like Dowman, he's got core attributes there that really, really lend itself to being given that opportunity earlier and handling it. So, yeah, I hope Patino goes on to do well. I watched with interest last season because he didn't play much, did he? I think he only made, I was reading Thomas's piece, he only made something like 8 appearances last season. It was clearly a difficult season for him. But there's nothing to say that he won't bounce back from that over time. But yeah, these names, especially when we follow teams, we always hear about them, don't we, in the academy? Oh, there's one coming down the track. You know, it gives you such excitement and hope. And then when it doesn't materialize, you can feel a little bit flat at times. But that is just the nature of talent, young talent.
We all want immediate answers, don't we? In terms of, we see a wonder kid and we christen them as the next best thing, and we think, right, we map out their stages for them. We want to think, right, first team debut, they're going to start playing regularly for the first team, they're going to be captain one day. It's not always going to be like that. Again, even for amazing talents like Charlie Patino, at that point, progress is not always going to be linear. It's not always going to be a straight way, and it's not always going to work out how you anticipate. And I think people think, okay, he didn't make it at Arsenal. Okay, he's now somewhere else outside of man. He's never going to reach the heights or the potential we thought he would. But everyone takes different routes. You're not always going to be at the perfect time. But Dowman's breaking through, although, as Stu rightly says, he's far superior in terms of athleticism. He's in a far more stable structure than Charlie Patino was at that point. He's talking about David Luiz. They're completely different times in Arteta's tenure, really. So it's all about finding your feet and what works, and that's why the next move after you leave and you step outside the bubble, like Patino, it needs to be the best one, really, for you, and that's the most important one to get you back on the journey again.
I was subbed for the first team once, didn't get on. I never played a game in professional football. My career was semi-pro. I'd have done anything to play one game. And when people sometimes say these guys don't make it, yet they've still played professional football at a good level, I have so much respect for those players. So maybe Patino hasn't gone on to be what we thought he would be. But in my eyes, he still had a fantastic career already. There are so many hurdles you go through as a young player with a professional football club to try and get up through, to try and get to, 15, 16s, to then get a scholarship, to get your first pro contract, to then get into the first team squad. Anyone who's been through all that are just full of admiration for them. So that kind of thing, they didn't make it. It doesn't sort of sit that well with me at times. I'm like, no, they did make it. They might not have got to the level that some people thought they'd get to, but they made it, and they were in a tiny group of players who did that. So, yeah, I think we sort of too easy sort of dismiss that and write them off. When you've been in that system, I don't know how you feel, Jacob, you just respect people who've gone through all those hurdles and got there, even if they didn't play 500 games in the Premier League.
I think the toughest thing for me was just every year getting a new contract at the end of it. That's one of the, I still think one of my biggest achievements, although my career didn't amount to much in the end. Going from under-8s to under-16s, every year you're getting judged. And so I've passed 8 different tests almost in that time. It's a big step. So the fact that people say that, like Stu says, they didn't quite make it. They still got to the first team. They still passed a huge amount of tests under severe pressure physically, psychologically, and they done it. And like Stu says, they should only be applauded for that.
And I think you're spot on. And I also think about, when you think about some of big players, like someone like Victor Gyökeres, for instance, starting off in Sweden really young, having to find his way through Brighton, Sao Paulo, Swansea, going lower leagues, and then finding his way at Sporting, and then finally becoming the striker he probably in his head thought he would be when he started out in the game, now playing for Arsenal. It just shows that not everyone's journey is actually linear. Gents, let's leave it there. I could talk about this all day. Stu, Jacob, thanks for your time, and also thank you guys for watching as well. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and also leave us a comment as well. Right, that's us done. We'll see you soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.